Hello and welcome to another exciting short update from the host of Conspiracism, Dr. M.R. Extentith. I should put a bit of vocal boom on that to make it sound exciting, but I really can't be bothered because it's just another straight-to-camera thing where I'm playing around with my new phone and the fancy real-time... They want to say this is cartoon? It's a little bit like a Scanner Darkly film, done in real time, as opposed to having to rotoscope the entire thing. But at the same time, it's not quite right. It's fun enough for an experiment, but you wouldn't want to use it all the time. Maybe it works better with different lighting, or if I styled my hair slightly differently, or I had blue skin. Anyway, you're not here for me to talk about my camera. If you are, there are other YouTube channels that do that better. No, I'm here once again to talk about chapters. This time, not a conspiracy theory about a copy editor with respect to my chapter, but a chapter I'm working on for a book about conspiracy theories in Eastern Europe. Because aside from being a conspiracy theory theorist, who is an expert in my field, I'm also a little bit of an expert on Romanian conspiracy theories, having lived there for several years and done a lot of work in Romania. So when it was decided that Rutledge were going to publish a book on conspiracy theories in Eastern Europe, one of the editors went, You must write a chapter on conspiracy theories in Eastern Europe, mentioning Romania, but mostly doing the theoretical work of setting up the philosophical and epistemic debate about why belief in conspiracy theory isn't necessarily irrational. And Romania is important in this debate, as is actually most Eastern European countries, for the sheer fact that Romania has a long, rich history of conspiracy. Whether it was the fascist state that occurred basically between World War II and the beginning of the communist regime, which of course happened in the aftermath of what happened after World War II, but Eastern European politics gets very complicated when you start talking about the terrible things that happened there in the interwar and post-war periods. There was fascism, there was communism. It wasn't very good. That's basically the short story. Anyway, where was I going with this? Oh yes, so Romania has this long history. I just lost the point there. I had no idea what I was doing this video about. I should probably script these things. Romania has this long history of conspiracy, whether it be the security police that operated in the fascist period, or the Securitate, who operated during the communist period. And the Securitate are kind of an interesting story. So most of the communist bloc countries, whether they were Soviet republics, or occupied by the Soviets, or Soviet-aligned countries like Romania was, ended up having a secret police of some kind. So Estonia had their secret police modelled on the KGB. Romania had its secret police, which was basically a successor to the secret police in the fascist period, remodelled on KGB-style grounds called the Securitate, and the Securitate were basically a terror police force in that they collected large amounts of information on people and used that information to then blackmail people to collaborate with the Securitate to get more information on other people. And so the Securitate were feared and loathed. And people were suspicious during the communist period about people they knew because no one knew exactly who a Securitate official was, and they certainly didn't know who a potential collaborator with the Securitate would happen to be. Now, most countries that come out of communism often come out of communism with respect to an opposition party taking control. But Romania is quite interesting in its post-communist legacy in that effectively they got rid of Nicolae Ceausescu, who was the leader of the Communist Party at the time, but the successor government was largely made up of communist officials who simply weren't happy with the way that Ceausescu was running things at the time. So essentially, the new government of Romania, which wasn't a communist government, was made up of communist officials. And of course, communist officials were working with the Securitate, because technically the Securitate worked at the behest of the Communist Party, although there's quite a lot of literature as to whether the Securitate was basically operating independently, and communist officials were scared of them at the time. But of course, the officials that took over after the December Revolution, the thing that toppled the communist government in Romania, basically formed a new information service that would be a successor to the Securitate, but wouldn't be the Securitate. But they did it in such a closed fashion that people became suspicious that the new information service was basically the Securitate by another name. And this meant that actually for a lengthy period of time, the successive Romanian government post the December Revolution, which toppled communist control, wouldn't do anything to allow the public to access their Securitate files, in part because it was suspected they were protecting Securitate officials and also protecting themselves because it was suspected, former collaborators or officials in the Securitate who had got to their high prestige political position because of the things they'd done in the communist period. And of course, they didn't want that information coming out. And so there's quite a lengthy literature which actually investigates exactly how a public access law came into existence in Romania well after similar laws were enacted, say, in places like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, etc. And it's quite fascinating because it just speaks to the fact that even after the fall of communism, and when Romania was meant to be a modernizing political economy, there was all this secrecy going on in the background, which led people to go, the conspiracies continue to this very day. And so the chapter that I'm currently finishing kind of looks at some of that as background as to why in the Eastern European context, it's quite natural to think of conspiracy theories as being normal in your governments, if not because historically it has been. You might also have evidence that the cover-ups are still going on to this day. Because when that law came into effect in Romania in about 1999, allowing the public access to Securitate files, and there was a sudden look at who are our political masters, what is their background, it was taken to be very suspicious that A, a number of files were missing, thought to be destroyed, and B, none of the major members of the government with ties to the old Communist Party were in any way in the files of Securitate collaborators. And people found that suspicious, and I think rightfully so. That's not to say that the government of Romania at the time was ridden with Securitate personnel. It's simply to say that the lack of big names in the files made people think that maybe the bits of the files that had gone missing possibly had been destroyed for a particular reason, maybe to cover up things that the people ought to know about. So, that's just something I'm working on at the moment, and an excuse to make a short video to make my arm really quite sore and tired from holding it up like this to keep my face in frame the entire time. So with that, I'm going to go toodly-pip and get back to working on said chapter.